Hello, welcome back to Reality Check. Welcome to our channel. We care for hearts and minds. Every week we have conversations regarding mental health and what could potentially affect your mental health in the areas of relationships, marriage, family, parenting, and your overall being as an individual. And today is not different. We have a wonderful discussion on what we are terming as crisis management. And while that might sound very technical and very corporate, it actually has a lot to do with you as an individual. And we're going to be focusing this conversation on dealing with loss and just the uncertainty of loss. Loss of a job, loss of finances, loss of business investment, and loss in general. So welcome to the show and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this link or episode with a friend. I'm joined by two amazing people to help us get into this discussion. Dr. Evas Atwine, who is the founder at International Center for Mental Health and Family Care. She's also a trained therapist, again in the areas of marriage, family, relationships and parenting, and also offers support in workplaces or corporate environments. And then Sarah Walakira, who, I've pronounced your name with Kawowo. I know Sarah personally, but I also know her as a marketing professional for over 15 years. And you are also the founder, and she's also the founder and founder of Life Associates, which deals with crisis management, crisis communication, and anything along those lines. She's a Christian, she's a mother, she's a wife, and she's a whole host of other things. And she looks amazing in purple today. Welcome, Sarah. And thank you for joining us for this discussion. Crisis management, loss, uncertainty. I think it would be helpful for us to go personal as we start this discussion. And I want to ask each one of you if you have ever experienced loss and what that did to you as an individual, how you navigated that experience, because it would help set the tone for this discussion.
Guests first.
It should be hosts first.
I know, right? I feel like that we should do hosts first.
Yes, I also feel the same way.
Let's allow Sarah to settle in.
Crisis, you want one?
Give us the most impactful.
I think the most impactful was when we, as a family, my husband and I, got into some business venture with a person. And we didn't know him well. Yeah. He had been introduced by one of our relatives and who claimed to know him very well. And it involved loss of so much money, a lot of money, and which money was actually a loan money, and it was a big loss, big loss. You know, when you lose money you've never earned, and you don't even see anywhere it's going to come from. So I can't tell you, and we were young, we were just, I think we were just a couple of years in marriage. Yeah, and we had little children, and you're losing this amount of money that you've never earned. So it was very, very destabilizing, and I can't tell you how many times I cried. I would cry, I cursed the guy, I prayed those prayers. Those prayers, and he wasn't hit by a Buddha. Yeah, it was really tough, and yeah. So that crisis. When you ask, did you manage it successfully? I don't even know. What I know is that I didn't die.
You're here.
I'm here. Yeah. So it was really tough. Yeah. It was very tough, but as God would have it, it ended, and we got the money and we paid it back from sources we never expected. So it was amazing. So.
That's the thing about loss, especially financial loss, and you mentioned money that doesn't belong to you. That means pressure is probably coming from different sides. You know, the people who gave you the money, who lent you the money, how you feel about the person who made you lose the money, and then there's dealing with your own internal demons, like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to get out of this situation? It just seems bleak, desperate, and just like one of those things, like, will we ever get out of this thing? And I guess you are a living testimony that it's possible. Yeah. Sarah?
You know, when she asked, should I say one? Mine is going to be a bit of a chain. One led to another, and another led to another. So a couple of years ago, I had a sequel of miscarriages while at work, at my corporate job. And when I got pregnant the next time, I think at about 4 months pregnant, I told God, I can't lose this one. I just can't lose this one. So I told God, if it's the stress, if it's because you think about all these things and you're thinking maybe it's because of this or because of the other. And I told my husband, I think I need to reduce on workforce. I can't reduce on you. So there are other areas of my life that I can reduce on. And said, maybe it's time to step away. I'm not the kind of person who ideally would have stepped away without knowing, okay, what next? Where am I going to work? And stuff like that. So I stepped down from my job. I woke up one day and told my boss, for these reasons, I need to step away from work. So, should I call that a loss of job? I will categorize it as such. And then my husband's like, no, don't worry about it. You'll be managing the business, a hospitality business. There's a farm, there's activities. So you'll be busy and you'll be pregnant, and then you'll go into maternity. And lo and behold, just a few months after that, COVID hit.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
COVID hit, and the hospitality business closed and the farm closed.
The things you were relying on.
Exactly, like your physical backup position, just all came to a wind. And
how did you deal?
It's been a journey. It's been a journey, but it's been a journey of identity, purpose, discovering new things, discovering things that you can actually do, walking a journey of understanding what you were before and navigating where you're going and how you can actually do that much better, getting into the consultancy space, volunteering. It's been a journey. It's been a journey, but an interesting one. I'm actually glad it happened the way it did.
But you say that now in hindsight.
I say that now in hindsight, but it's interesting that even within the journey, I don't remember crumbling to the ground. I remember having a season of introspection of it. Okay, how? Like, how did we get here? We're supposed to be a certain way, a certain time, and stuff like that. How did we reach here? But I think the priority for me was what was exciting. The fact that I could look at my son and I'm like, boss, you are the reason for this season that we're going through. And when I hold him, I'm like, it was the right thing to do. Something good came out of it, and many other good things.
And you raised something that I want us to discuss. I want us to call it planning for or anticipating loss. And if there's any benefit in anticipating the loss and maybe safeguarding yourself, because anticipating the loss and planning for it doesn't necessarily avert that mean it won't happen. And so maybe, like, how do you guys think about loss? If, for example, you were to advise someone on planning for it, is there such a thing?
Like planning for a crisis?
Like planning for a crisis, yes.
Well, Maybe. But I'll tell you, a crisis will pop up whether you want it or not. And it becomes a crisis because we had not planned for it. And so a crisis is inevitable. I think that's what people need to know, that there are certain things that you could do when we are planning, when we are, like, for instance, getting into a crisis, rather into a business venture, or like you make a decision to quit the job. I do a lot of exit counseling for people, and in some cases you find that someone has been, there are some companies that are just amazing, that will, someone says I want to resign, and then the head of HR will say, are you sure this is a good decision? And so they will engage you and do that. And so when I'm working with people to evaluate their decisions, then there's some crisis you can avert, where you say, are you sure this is it? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Because there are certain crises we really can see, and we just plunge into them. But crisis by its nature, much of it is actually unanticipated, and so if you talked about preparation, I think it's just a mental preparation where you know that this happens. So when a crisis comes, you don't die, then you get up, then you die. Otherwise, otherwise, where will you end? Because if you don't get a crisis with your job, it can come through your child, it can come through, I mean, it can come through anything. We experience loss all the time. And so for me as a mental health practitioner, to tell people to know that crisis is normal. It's inevitable. You can never be too smart to avert a crisis. It will just show up in any way. But understanding and appreciating that it's a factor of life is an issue of maturity. Yeah, it's an issue of maturity. Then, as Sarah was saying, you don't crumble all the time. But you know that, oh, it's a crisis, then I need to manage it. That's why we talk about crisis management.
Yeah, and we will get into that. Yeah.
Honestly, managing a crisis will be proactive. It has to have happened already. What you can possibly plan for are the risks, the possible risks, like you spoke about and said, I'm getting into a business venture. What is likely to happen? I'm going down and the road is not leveled properly. Do I go in my heels or should I wear flat shoes? There is a possible risk that you can think about and deal with, or manage how you navigate it. But a crisis has already happened. I think what we need to realize is that having conversations about the worst possible risks that can happen, and learning from experiences, not just from your experience, but also from experiences of others, and think about, introspect and say, okay, if this happened to me, before it happens, how would I approach it? If I'm out of a job now, how would I go about it? Instead of, we usually say, God forbid. Yes. I don't know what that means anymore. Because like, even for someone goes for a funeral and they say, oh my God, you know, it's possible. You just actually tell somebody. I like to laugh about this. Sometimes I can tell my husband, you know, when I die, he's like, don't even, like, the conversation can't go past that. And yet in actual sense, it's a cycle of life. At a certain point, we will transition. So having the realization that it will happen. When it happens, what am I going to do? How am I going to wake up every single day? I remember when I left work, I knew one thing for sure: my phone was not going to ring as often as it did. I knew that I needed to come up with activities that are going to take up my time. In my pregnancy stage, in my maternity stage, and after that, what am I going to use my time for? How am I going to use my brain? Like, I wake up in the morning and I have no presentation to make, or no, you understand, how am I going to work that out? So the realization that you have to actually deal with it
is very important. Yeah, and I like what you've both said. It's mostly in the mind. having those difficult conversations with yourself, with the people who are likely to be affected by the loss, you know, like what could happen, what are the possible risks, is very, very valuable. I want us to talk about what are some of those problematic ways we deal with, whether it's loss or whatever crisis that, you know, we are facing. You talked about crying a lot, and not that that's problematic in itself, but I think if it goes unchecked and all you're doing is crying, then that can be problematic. Yeah, let's kind of talk about like what are some of those unhealthy ways that we deal with crisis, and what is the antidote to, you know, better tools to manage crisis.
Okay, so I'll use the 3 F's. The 3 F's, one is freezing.
Freezing, yeah.
Yeah, so it has happened, now I'm frozen. What are you thinking? Nothing. I don't know. I'm just crying. And by the way, that happens. So number one, I mentioned that a crisis needs management. So that's what we have to know. It needs management. So you can't afford to freeze. And again, in my work as a therapist, I've seen people freeze, like freeze. Now that can work in the short term, but it doesn't help. Then, of course, so you can freeze as much, but you have to melt and deal with the thing. So the art of problem solving does not accommodate freezing. So we'll talk about what has to happen. But then the other wrong way is the second F, which is flight. Yeah, so you just take a mental flight or a physical flight or both.
Yeah, don't look for me. I'm just
yeah, so you flee. You flee. Now that fleeing doesn't solve the problem, doesn't solve the crisis. And that's what, in psychology, we call it denial. Yeah, so someone just gets into denial and they say, somehow it will solve itself. You've had statements like, time will heal all things. But sometimes time doesn't heal all things, and you have to deal with an issue. And so it's very important to step down and accept the situation and know, you know, this is a crisis, I need to deal with it. The third F is fight. Fight. Warrior. So someone will, militants, what we call militants in crisis management, they are not solving a problem, they are fighting and they are creating more crisis. Right? Just my brain goes very quickly because this is what I do every day, like a relationship crisis. So you find that instead of sitting, internalizing where this is coming from, generating options to solving a problem, you're very busy fighting the crisis itself, fighting the source that has brought it, fight. Now, that usually never helps. So those don't help. So the 3 F's. And then, of course, I talked about militant who are fighters. But then there's also another ineffective strategy, which is worrying. Yeah, warriors, we call them warriors. So all they do is to worry. So if something has happened now you're going to exaggerate it. So you're going to create what we call a mental blank check, and you're going to write on it other things. So now that this has happened, there is also going to be this, and there's also going to be this. So you find that by the end of the day, you have a mountain, yet nothing solves the problem that it is. So you started with one crisis, you have like 10 things now to deal with. Yeah, so that.
Okay. Just to add to that, I've also come to realize that there's blame game.
Yes.
Blame game where you're not dealing with a crisis or what happened to you or why why you caused the crisis if you're the one who caused it, but you're trying to look at who to blame, what to blame, and many times it didn't help at all. The other thing that people usually do is substance abuse. I'll get a height, I'll get drunk, I will forget, but also addictions that may not necessarily be substance abuse, but extreme, I'll use this, and the athletes don't kill me, extreme sport. So you just wake up and somebody just decides they're going all out to do all the weird things and just, you know, to cool off the steam, which doesn't necessarily take away what you're dealing with, but just extends the duration within which you have to deal with what you have to deal with. So yeah.
Actually, what she's mentioning here, she reminded me, some of them, we call them emotional hideouts. You hear someone say, I need some peace. And so that's how they go sports. Not that they love sports, but they'll just go and cram all the players and pretend they love soccer so much. But also those unhealthy coping mechanisms, which produce secondary crisis. For instance, you have a crisis in your relationship, and then you pick someone else to have temporal peace. And so, you know, certain such things. So hideouts because you're refusing to deal with an issue. So you're going to create both physical and emotional hideouts. Yeah, it's very, very dangerous. Maybe also, Rachel, emotional eruptions. Outbursts, yeah. So those, most people don't understand, so I will explain it as a psychologist. The moment you're emotionally charged, the logical brain doesn't function. Yes, it shuts down. So if you're, so if you're just using your brain emotionally, you're engaging this part of the brain to make decisions, to judge situations, then the logical part doesn't function. So yeah, so there's no, you're going to make what we call emotionally driven decisions, and emotions have no future, but also they have no logic. So if you do not subject them, if you do not run those emotions by the logical part of your brain and say, if I do this, what will happen? And by the way, this takes like just a couple of microseconds to run an issue. That's why people kill in the moment, and then they are regretting. They are regretting after. Now the regret is logic. But now the decision you made was emotionally driven. So it's very important to always keep emotionally stable. That's why, for instance, the Bible talks about be still, be still. In the midst of chaos, be still. Because in stillness, then you're going to think. Yeah? You've seen like parents kill a child because of 500 shillings. Now, do you think later on they are saying, I did great? No. So those decisions we made, emotional decisions we make, then later on you have to think in retrospect. Yeah, so emotional stability. Now, emotional outbursts can be such a problem.
They can be.
Yeah, because the moment you engage in it, you get triggered to keep going, to keep going.
Like your emotions, no. Yes. You have to be right, you have to win.
Exactly.
You have to win. Yeah. Sarah, you talked about something that I would like for us to kind of talk about, your situation with loss and how, like now in hindsight, you're thinking, oh, there's been some purpose, like I've discovered a lot of things about myself. And I think that we can take advantage of crisis situations. We can take advantage of loss to move forward, to advance. It can be the thing that you needed. You didn't know you needed it, but you need it to kind of propel you towards better. And so I want to draw from your experience, but also draw from an experience that we all saw globally, the COVID-19 experience. You know, we had never experienced the world shut down like that, and yet it did, and many businesses were birthed, out of that. You know, many relationships came out, like a lot of good came out of it, even though there was a lot of bad. And so I want us to talk about how we can draw from those experiences of loss or crisis and either become more resilient or, you know, find our purpose, draw from that to find the positive. I don't know if my question makes sense. Yeah. You want to go first?
So from my experience and with the experience that I had with COVID, it's going to sound odd, but interestingly, COVID was the best time of my life.
Really?
Yes. Because I got time to spend time with my family. Like with my husband, with my children. No pressure. Yeah. We are not going to go through traffic. We are not going to go through anything. We eat what's available. We work together. We do everything literally together. I discovered things I had never seen about my daughter. And I kept thinking, my God, I missed. Like, I missed so much. So for me, it gave me an advantage to look at what was priority. I would, you know, and yet I thought I was the best mom because I gave her like everything. Even when I was going to have my son, everybody asked me, would you love another child the way you've loved Liza? But yet, in hindsight, after spending more time with her, I realized I deprived her of so much of my time, of my experience. So for me, the loss gave me an advantage to reprioritize what should come first, but also gave me purpose in terms of knowing who I am in Christ without everything else. Because COVID forced us. You had no choice. For me, it was a coincidence that there was loss going on around, but with all of that, COVID just made my loss quite tiny because still we were on, we were, you know, locked out. So I learned to prioritize. I learned to understand who I am without the noise. As a person in Christ, what my purpose was and what I needed to do in my purpose, even to support my career or my entrepreneur side of life going forward, or how to deal with my marriage going forward, how to deal with my motherhood going forward, how to deal with my relationships going forward. Because I remember in the season, at first I had the expectations of this person needed to be there for me in a certain way, and they were not. And I realized, no, my input into them doesn't mean they'll be my output. My output will probably be somewhere else altogether. So for me, it helped me reorganize my life. So loss really came to reorganize and help you reprioritize what's important and actually what's not, or what's important and what's importanter.
You forged an English word.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah.
I'll share my experience from COVID, but let me just start generally. As a life coach, we help people understand that growth and comfort zones don't coexist. Yes. Yeah. Actually, I think some of us have had people explain why certain societies which are developed have developed because of hardship and crisis. And so if you bring this to an individual or personal level, this happens. People who have, it's not uncommon to see and check, and if we are attentive enough, we are going to see that someone who has actually overcome crisis, not been submerged by a crisis, actually has a better view of life. Yeah, they look at things differently. Just remember when we had just gotten saved when we were young, the testimonies we would give. Praise God, you know, my name is who, I got saved then, and since I got saved, I've never regretted. But now when you have a broader experience, life is experienced. And when we experience life, how we allow those experiences to shape us will determine whether we are better or bitter people.
Yes.
So crisis, actually, if allowed, if we have a good mental stature, they are going to help us be better. Because by the way, in life coaching and in psychology generally, when you overcome a hurdle, you become better. You become an expert. And because we are never trained, we don't have a school where they trained you in life management. We experience it, and we experience these crises. Now, when you are able to overcome a crisis, you develop a skill called problem solving. And problem solving is one of the skills for life improvement, but also emotional intelligence. Now, have you seen someone who can solve a problem? Every time they run away from a problem, they are becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. But when you solve a crisis, you become better. When it presents again, or any other, the brain has already recorded that you're well positioned to address a problem. So it is very important for people to know that comfort zone is desired by every human being. We naturally desire comfort zone and pleasure, but then crisis is there. And so when a crisis comes, you don't solve it with comfort zone. They don't. Now, this solving a crisis is actually a foundation for growth. Very important. Now, that's important. Secondly, a crisis helps us to discover other strengths and gifts and skills that we had actually never thought about. Remember, when we are in a comfort zone, we are not thinking so much. But in a crisis, you discover so many things. That's why I always tell people that some of the minerals and precious minerals are actually brought to the surface by earthquakes. So some of the earthquakes in our lives are actually meant to bring, they are supposed to bring to the surface or birth certain gifts you never thought you had, right? So let me now share my experience with COVID. When COVID started, we had, so I had switched careers, and it had been just like 2 years. And we were still staggering, trying to get our feet on the ground. And I mean, it was just like a totally different shift, because I had been doing international jobs, big jobs, where you're used to this comfort. And you have a PA, you have board, you have a round table. But now I've left all that, and I've gone to start totally different profession. And remember, I still have doubts. I'm like, did I make the right decision? So I'm there, we're still trying to get some clients. People don't appreciate therapy. They are saying, what do you mean? We are going to the workplaces. They are saying, our staff are okay. Who told you they have stress? And so we had just gotten 2 client organizations. And that was in February. One of the clients who had come on board, we had just done, we did the first, what we call mental awareness session, which we do for all companies. And so we had just done that awareness creation session on the 28th of February. And we were happy. I said, yeah, these ones. And then COVID. 2 weeks later, we got into a lockdown on March 18th, I think. And I'm thinking, God, you can't be serious. Because even a person coming to the therapy center they are dragging their feet. Now how about you've locked them out? Yeah. And I want to tell you, on the 1st of April, I spent 2 weeks frozen. And then I'm thinking I'm freezing. I'm thinking I'm freezing. But one time I'm seated somewhere, and I had heard someone talk about online sessions and the online platforms, Zoom. I checked it out. I called out someone, our media person. I said, "Do you know Zoom?" He said, "Yes." I said, do you think one can get training? And he said, "Yeah." And that was 1st of April. And I wrote a concept to companies for Zoom. I did training. I saw how one can do an online session, group session, and all that, and also do online counseling. So I wrote a concept. I first sent it to one of the big companies we had gotten, and they said, "Oh, this is good." And then I tried it out. I did an online session, and people were happy. I had over 500 people, it's a big company, on the call. And then they thought, "Hey, it works." Then I did another training in MS Teams. Some companies were using Teams. I did that. And I want to tell you, we moved from 2 client organizations to 12.
In a season of crisis.
Just in a season of crisis. So when people were crying, "Oh, there's no business, our company, you have been run down," for us, we were in business. And then even the companies we had gone to, they were draggy. They were saying, "Oh," now they were looking for us and saying, "Oh, can you do, how can you support our employees?" So it was, and I want to tell you, later on we had get together for our professionals. And most of my counterparts or colleagues were stuck. So so now since that time, I am very good. I do online sessions, and I don't get scared by anything. And so that's how a crisis was able to
bring. What's a wonderful, wonderful story. I wanted to talk about job loss and not the voluntary job loss, because you decided to leave your job. The kind where people are laid off from work as a crisis for the employee who has been laid off. I know, because I have experienced being laid off from work, and I remember my friend asking me shortly after it happened, "Oh, Rachel, how are you feeling?" I said, "Actually, I think I'm okay." And she's like, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, it's surprising. I'm actually fine." And the following day I called, I said, "I feel terrible. I feel like I've been rejected." And she's like, "Yeah, I was really shocked at your response the other day." And so maybe to speak to somebody who might be going through that, the company has decided, we are letting you go. It's not personal, but it feels personal. You know, like, what would you say to someone like that? And based on the tools that you've shared about taking advantage of situations like that, what would be like a 3-step strategy? Let's make it simple, or a 2-step strategy, something that can help them make sense of this season, however tough it might be.
I'll speak to both. I'll speak to one who is still employed. Unless you're the heir of that business, you could be laid off tomorrow.
That's true.
The company could lose money for whatever reason. Your boss could just sabotage your appointment. You could be laid off tomorrow, unless you're the heir. But even when you're the heir, the business could get out of business, and you would still lose your job. So you always have to be aware. Interesting, when I was still employed, I always had a resignation letter.
Really?
And I always used to tell my boss, whoever managed me would know, I'm always out looking. Like, this is not my, it hasn't been my first, neither it's not going to be my final. I'm always ready for what is yet to come, because I realized there was a time I worked at one of the companies I worked at, and a driver got an accident, and his car wasn't so messed up, but the person went into ICU, And the following day, that car was reallocated to somebody else.
Just like that.
It was my second year of employment. My brain woke. I realized, hey, this is how it is. I die today, tomorrow they will replace me. So you have to come to the realization that it is likely to happen, and you deal with it emotively and start to plan, okay, should it happen? Am I financially ready? Are my children financially ready? Am I insured? And that is if you're able to do so. Am I insured? Do I have a side hustle somewhere that I'm looking at? What skills have I gathered here? Because many a times we're in employment and we are on a roller coaster. You pass documents, they come through here, they get here, they go here. You're not learning anything new. You're not doing anything to make yourself better. You're not reading, you're not advancing. Academically, you're just there. You're in, you're out, and then you leave your job and you can't use signing skills anywhere. Everybody can sign. But what skills have you developed within yourself across the value chain to help you navigate? Should you get out, navigate to say, okay, fine, I need a service. When I would have conversations after I'd left, every time I would have conversations with someone, it was an opportunity. Like I would hear, oh, you know, business, we're going through COVID, we're going through this, I need this, maybe I could do this. And I'm like, you know, I can support you to do X, Y, Z. I can support you to do A, B, C. And for me, that from a private consultant kept bringing me money here and there, but also I was able to use my brain. So for someone who is inside, beware. At a certain point, it can actually happen. If it has already happened to you and you're possibly freezing, I need you to sit down and realize that you have many more years ahead of you. So how are you planning for those many more years ahead of you? And guess what? The years ahead of you are better than your previous years, yes. So how do you want those to look like? What skills have you gathered? You know, there is a lot of online material that you can actually take advantage of. What skills have you gathered in the interim? Should you want to get another job? But in this interim, what skills have you gathered to help you? Have you identified what your purpose is, or where you want to go, or what you want to do? Are you still looking at that blueprint board that you put up? I need to be your vision board. I need to be traveling 20 times a year. Maybe it's time to revisit some of these conversations and say, okay, fine, if I still need to travel 20 times a year, what do I need to do to achieve that? But also the support system is very important. Should you be unable to get out of it, they're experts. I'll tell you, it's not easy for everybody to just snap out of it. Some people will say, I'll pray through it. Should you be able to pray through it, good for you. Should you not be able to get yourself out, seek help. Seek help, find somebody to talk to, and one of the things you need to do is lose the expectations. Lose expectations of people, lose expectations of circumstances. Don't expect people to be a certain way, because that's also unfair to them and to yourself. There's no contract that you signed with these individuals to be nice to you when you're going through a hard time. But develop your skills, develop your tenacity, seek help, navigate your relationships, and see who best can hold your hand during this transition. And trust me, the better days are
ahead. That's so true. That's so true. It's really a good time to reflect. I think emphasis on that would be, after you have overcome the flight or the fear or the freezing, just to sit down and think about how you got there, what you can do with yourself. I like the part about, you know, developing your skill, especially even when you're still in the workplace. Doctor?
Yeah, I like that she talked about that. We encourage people to discover themselves when you're still working. You see, human beings always need reminders. When we are in comfort zones, you can think that you're going to do a job forever. I remember one time I lost a job, an international job. It was big. The company ran out of resources, and like a few days before, I was saying, I think I'll do this job for the next 20 years. And then I got, yeah. So that can happen. And so the most important thing is, can you take time to reflect, introspect, discover what else you can do beyond the job you're doing? Because we've seen people collapse, lose a job today, tomorrow collapse and die. And it can happen. It can happen. You see, grief, when we talk about grief, grief is not just a loss of a human being. No, we grieve any loss. And grief can be horribly impairing. And so once we are not ready, or we are not alert, you can easily be impaired by grief. And people die. You can drop dead because of excessive stress, excessive pressure, and people plunge into depression. So it's very important for us to know that your worth is not just in one job. So if you're doing this job, it's a deployment, but you can do so many other things. For instance, I think Rachel shared here that I used to do programming work. I was in HIV health and programming. I was doing a lot of work with children and families, but more from livelihoods, you know, other health programs, and not what I'm doing now. But throughout, I knew that I was created to be a therapist, because even when I was doing monitoring and evaluation work, programming there, I would find lots of fulfillment whenever I would be talking to people. And I remember on one of my assignments, I asked that they change my position to a psychosocial support expert instead of, because it gave me so much satisfaction. And so it doesn't surprise anyone then that later on I had to move into this, because I knew that I had very good, I was gifted to be a counselor, and I had later on to professionalize my gift and train to be a therapist, a professional therapist. But this is not what I was doing before. For like 25 years, I was doing other things. So it's very important for people to, while they are still working, ask themselves the question, what else am I capable of? Probably you're good at baking cakes. You see, those gifts are not white collar, but those can actually sustain you when you lose a job. And then also, Rachel, to remind viewers that it's normal for us to grieve. Yeah, I thought I would emphasize that, because while we talk about, yes, snap out of it, get out, but it's real, and it's normal for you to feel sad.
Yeah, it felt possible. And yet we were a bunch of us who had been laid off, so I'm like, oh, I might be offended.
Yes, so that is likely to happen, and it's normal. You're going to get confused. Yeah. You know, when I think about a grief wheel, we all experience shock and disbelief. That's stage one. But stage two is anger and protest. You see? And so we go through that wheel, grief wheel. So you get into shock. Really? How? And then we get into anger and protest. And that's when we start saying, no, this is personal. When you are 100 people, how can it be personal? and even in your head, you know this is not real, but it comforts you to say it's personal. And then we move from that stage to depression. So we all experience some bit of depression, and it's normal. It's absolutely normal. It's only we encourage that, please don't die. Don't live in depression, because you can easily die. And so we go through that. So we call it emotional reaction to loss. So you get into depression, and then the good news is that there is acceptance and recovery. Eventually. Yeah, but how long it takes people through that it varies from an individual to an individual. And that's why we were talking about expecting it. Because when someone is there in comfort zones, and then, I mean, I've heard even big placed people, their cabinet reshuffles, they are panicking, and if they announce and say, oh, this position now has gone somewhere, they say, bring the cars, bring the guards, bring, you know, and then this person, they die. So grief is terrible, and so this loss, it's not an easy thing to navigate. So people need to seek help. You know, talk to someone. If, for instance, I spoke to you and you said it's personal, probably I will ask a few questions and say, why? Why do you feel it's personal? Were you alone? Well, no, we're not, but you know that supervisor. Yeah, but, yes, you know, and so we are likely to have what we call mental distortions, and so those mental distortions, most of the time you cannot manage them alone. So that's why we encourage, please speak to someone, speak to a therapist. That's why they are trained to help you navigate rough surfaces like this.
Thank you both. Thank you. I don't know if each one of you have like a parting shot, something that you want our audience to go away with from this discussion on navigating loss. I think one of the things that you said for me that was important to note is that it's inevitable, and you can have those conversations and prepare mentally before it happens. So 30 seconds. Final words.
Final words, 30 seconds. One thing that I would like everybody to live away with is whether you're going through loss or not. If you're not, it will come eventually. At a certain point, the Bible is clear. There will be trials. However, the Lord will be with us to navigate them through. So at a certain point in your life, you'll go through a crisis, you will encounter loss. But in whose identity are you encountering this loss with? You need to be very clear on that. So introspect whether you're on the other side of the fence or on this side of the fence, and know who you want to identify yourself with and as going forward in your life, because that really helps you have a firm foundation and footing on how you navigate life.
That's true. Yeah, for me, in addition to crisis is inevitable, people to know that crisis can be used to your advantage. So don't put it to waste. Yeah. It has already happened. Don't put it to waste. Let it bring out the best in you, and use it. Allow it to expose certain things about you that you're not able. By the way, it helps us to face ourselves. Yes, you see, and that crisis can really be a huge advantage. I know these are parting shots, Rachel, but if you allow me, I remember the story of, for instance, the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Probably he didn't know that he was as strong until this happened. And it was a big crisis. Who wants to go through that? Someone, as children, say they've forged things on you. And you go through this crisis and you're in prison and you do all that. But at the end of the day, he merged a prime minister. So that's why we talk about the 4 Ps. You know, Pete, Potiphar's as a slave, prison, and then prime minister. So we can all, as long as we are able to manage the crisis, then we can all be a prime minister. And that crisis, once again, it exposes certain precious things about you that you probably didn't know. So don't hate it after all. In any case, you may not be, it's inevitable in some cases, you know. When it has already happened, please use it to your advantage. Don't create more crisis out of it.
Wow. Thank you both. Thank you so much. What are you using your crisis situations for? How are you using them to your advantage? How are they becoming beneficial in your life and propelling you? I said that it might be the thing you didn't know you needed. You know, many of us think about moving forward as you know, Dr. Evas giving me money, or Sarah giving me an opportunity at Life Associates, or, you know, like the good stuff. And yet maybe you just need to go through that trench to rise to the pavement, you know, and then move forward. So not all crisis is bad. You can use it to your advantage, but how are you going through it? You know, in whose identity are you going through it with? And so things for you to think about. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. Let us know in our comment section what has stood out for you. If you know you're taking away anything from this show, we appreciate your feedback very, very much. We'll be back next week with another conversation. Keep it reality check. Stay well, stay healthy, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye.